Think about the cloud for a second. When most of us hear that word, we probably picture something abstract, right? Just data floating around invisibly in the air. But the reality? The reality is grounded in concrete, steel, and a whole lot of money. Right now, tech giants, think Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, are collectively pouring over $700 billion a year into building data centers. $700 billion. It sounds like the closest thing modern capitalism has produced to a guaranteed bet. But as we're going to see in this explainer, when you actually dig into the numbers, you discover an industry that is brutally physical, highly volatile, and insanely capital intensive. Because building a home for the cloud, well, it's a lot more earthbound than you might think.
To really wrap our heads around the economics here, it helps to completely shatter our mental model of what a data center actually is. It's not a technology business. Honestly, it never really was. At its absolute core, a data center is just a highly expensive power plant wrapped in concrete. Think of it like a massive, heavily regulated extension cord. What an operator actually sells is conditioned, uninterrupted electricity, delivered with extreme reliability. You buy power from a local utility, you wrap it in backup generators, cooling systems, and all these compliance certifications, and then you just sell that exact same electricity back at a massive markup. The servers, the software, none of that belongs to you. That's the tenant's problem. Your only job is to keep the lights on.
And keeping those lights on comes with an absolutely staggering cost of entry. $2.5 billion. No, that is not a typo. That is what a fully fitted out 100 megawatt AI optimized campus costs today. And that is just for the physical building and the cooling infrastructure. The margins in this business are definitely real, but the upfront cost just to secure a seat at the table is enough to make your eyes water. So, what is the biggest culprit behind that massive price tag? In a word, AI. The shift to AI has completely broken the traditional building model. For decades, a standard server rack drew maybe 5 to 10 kilowatts of power, and you could cool it just by blowing cold air through the room. Simple enough, right? But these new AI training clusters are a whole different beast. The latest NVIDIA systems can pull up to 135 kilowatts from a single rack. To put that into perspective, that is the equivalent electricity consumption of 40 American homes, crammed into a cabinet about the size of your refrigerator. You physically cannot blow enough cold air to stop something like that from melting down. So these new facilities have to be built with direct-to-chip liquid cooling from the ground up. Functionally, it is an entirely different type of building. Okay, so where does that multi-billion-dollar budget actually go before a single server is even plugged in? Surprisingly, it's not the walls or the roof. Nearly half of your entire construction budget, we're talking 45 to 50%, is dedicated purely to heavy electrical infrastructure. You're basically paying an unbelievably high premium just for the right to safely connect to the power grid. Let's actually look at the itemized receipt for that right to plug in, because these prices are wild. Just to step down the utility power, you need a dedicated high-voltage substation. That'll run you $3 to $7 million. The massive metal transformers? Up to $2 million each. And here's the real kicker. No serious operator can run without backup diesel generators. At roughly $1 million per megawatt, a mid-size 50-megawatt facility needs about $60 million just for generators that you literally pray you never ever have to turn on. Throw in the massive battery systems, and you are hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole before you've even signed your first customer. But hey, having billions of dollars is only half the battle. Time is the other half, and it is creating a massive supply chain nightmare right now. According to McKinsey, the typical development timeline is now 3 to 6 years. The real bottleneck? It's the equipment. High-voltage transformers, the absolute most critical pieces of this entire puzzle, now have lead times of up to 160 weeks. That is over 3 years just waiting for a delivery truck. This is forcing developers into what the industry calls front-end procurement. You're basically committing $10 million or more to order a transformer years before you even buy the land or secure a permit. You're just placing a blind bet that you'll eventually find a place to put the thing. So let's play this out. Let's say you survive the supply chain gauntlet and finally get the place built. Now you have to pay to keep the servers humming. Electricity is far and away your largest operating expense, and your geographic location dictates absolutely everything. If you've got a 50-megawatt facility in Northern Virginia, your annual power bill might be around $44 million. Move that exact same building out to Silicon Valley, it jumps to nearly $94 million. Stick it in Singapore, and you are staring down the barrel of $130 million a year. And that buys you nothing but the right to stay operational for another 12 months.
Because power is so expensive, efficiency becomes everything. Which brings us to a hypercritical metric, known as power usage effectiveness, or PUE. Essentially, this measures how much total energy your facility uses compared to how much just the IT equipment alone consumes. A perfect score of 1.0 is physically impossible, but bringing your PUE down from a standard air-cooled 1.5 to a liquid-cooled 1.1, that pays off massively. Over a standard 15-year lease, that tiny, fractional shift saves you hundreds of millions of dollars in electricity costs. Literally, a single decimal point shift in your PUE ratio is worth tens of millions of dollars. It's just astonishing.
But electricity isn't your only headache. You still have to staff the place, secure it, and constantly prove to regulators that it's safe. For retail facility, you're looking at 20 to 22 full-time, highly specialized staff. Then you need hundreds of thousands of dollars a year per megawatt just in maintenance contracts for your generators and coolers. Add in property taxes, insurance, physical security guards, and mandatory compliance audits like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Honestly, the sheer volume of paperwork required to pass these audits might use up more trees than the data center uses in power. All told, your operating expenses can run $50 to $75 million every single year, just to keep the front doors unlocked.
So, with all this cash flying out the door, how on earth do operators actually turn a profit? Well, wholesale and retail space leasing brings in the bulk of the revenue, sure, but the real profit margin lives somewhere kind of unexpected. Take Equinix, the world's largest colocation provider. About 20% of their total revenue, which is over $1.5 billion annually, comes from something called interconnection. This happens when two tenants in the exact same building want to exchange data directly. Equinix installs a simple fiber optic cable called a cross-connect and charges a monthly fee for it in perpetuity. That single cable essentially acts as a toll booth, generating pure passive income at an incredible 85% profit margin.
But hold on, before you think this is some guaranteed golden goose, let's talk macroeconomic risks. And there is no better cautionary tale than 6A Technologies. 6A was a massive global operator, boasting over 60 facilities worldwide. They had real revenue and blue-chip tenants, but they also carried roughly $2 billion in debt, and a lot of it was on floating interest rates. When the Federal Reserve aggressively hiked rates in 2022 and 2023, 6A's interest expense essentially doubled overnight. The buildings were totally fine. The tenants were paying their rent on time, but the debts swallowed them whole, forcing a massive bankruptcy in 2023. It's a pretty stark reminder that while the physical concrete of a data center might be indestructible, the financial structure built on top of it is incredibly fragile.
To really hammer home how razor-thin this margin of error actually is, let's run a quick comparison on a 20-megawatt facility in Dallas. In an optimistic scenario, everything goes right. You hit 90% occupancy, power rates stay low, and you generate over $18 million in EBITDA, leaving you with a nice, healthy, positive cash flow. But let's look at a realistic scenario. Say your transformer arrives 7 months late. Because of the delay, you have to offer rent concessions just to fill the building. Then, a brutal summer heat wave spikes your local power rate by just 2 cents. Boom! Suddenly, you are bleeding $6.5 million a year in negative cash flow. No fires, no massive scandals, just a minor equipment delay and a tiny rate hike, and you are staring down a major financial restructuring.
And zooming out, this isn't just a challenge for individual companies. It is a massive global bottleneck. The physical world is quite literally running out of space, power, and local goodwill. Down in Northern Virginia's Loudoun County, which is basically the absolute center of the global internet, vacancy is at an astonishing 0.3%. 0.3. There is literally nowhere left to plug in. And entire nations are starting to push back. Dublin actually had to enact a moratorium on new grid connections because data centers were eating up over a fifth of Ireland's total electricity. The Netherlands outright canceled a massive proposed metacampus. The world desperately needs these data centers. And yet, simultaneously, we cannot figure out where to actually put them.
Which brings us to just how utterly desperate this situation has become. I mean, check this out. Microsoft recently signed a 20-year agreement to literally restart a dormant nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island. They are doing this solely to guarantee uninterrupted, carbon-free electricity for their AI data centers. Let that sink in for a second. When one of the biggest tech companies on Earth decides it is actually easier to restart a closed nuclear power plant than to wait in a utility company's standard interconnection queue, you really begin to understand the massive scale of this problem. Skipping the line for power is now worth billions of dollars.
So, that leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question. Can the physical world actually sustain our digital ambitions? Generating demand for AI and the cloud, that's the easy part. The hard part, the real high-stakes gamble here, is surviving the multi-year gap it takes to secure the land, buy the transformers, and build the physical infrastructure before the market entirely shifts beneath your feet.
Because at the end of the day, a data center is not just a building. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar bet on the future of global energy, disguised as a warehouse full of blinking lights. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack all this, and I will catch you in the next explainer.